When Elizabeth Taylor passed away on March 23, 2011, she left behind a billion-dollar fortune and a Bel Air mansion nobody had fully seen inside. The doors opened, the trustees walked in, and what they discovered over the following weeks would stun even her closest family. Diamonds hidden beside paperback books, letters sealed for decades, and one envelope the estate has reportedly never opened. The house that kept every secret. The address was 700 Nimes Road, tucked behind iron gates in Bel Air, California. Elizabeth had lived there for most of her later life. She died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at the age of 79 from congestive heart failure. Her 4 children were at her bedside. Her grandchildren followed shortly after. And within days, the small team assigned to catalog her estate began their work. They expected a normal celebrity home, a few closets, some jewelry, some paperwork. What they walked into instead was closer to a private museum, because Elizabeth had never thrown anything away. For decades, her dear friend Roddy McDowell had urged her to save every piece of her life, from electric bills to evening gowns. And for decades, she listened. By 2011, her house had become a living archive of old Hollywood itself. The photographer Catherine Opie spent weeks inside 700 Nimes Road both before and after Elizabeth's death. She took thousands of images. Those photographs, later published in a book called 700 Nimes Road, remain the only real window into what the trustees saw when they entered. And some of those images raised more questions than they answered. The diamond she slept beside. The first discovery came in her bedroom. Sitting on her bedside table in a modest velvet box rested the Krupp diamond. A 33.19-carat Asher, cut stone, flawless, historic, and later renamed the Elizabeth Taylor diamond in her honor. Richard Burton had gifted it to her in 1968 while they were yachting together on the River Thames in England. Its value at the time of her death exceeded $8 million. But the ring wasn't locked away in a safe. According to multiple staff accounts later shared with biographers, Elizabeth kept it on her hand almost constantly. She reportedly wore it to bed every night. A household source claimed she said it made her feel safe. She was 78 years old, widowed 4 times over in spirit, and apparently she slept more soundly with that diamond pressed to her skin. Catherine Opie's photograph of that bedside table remains one of the most talked about images in the entire collection. The priceless ring rests next to a simple television remote control guide, a paperback worth nothing beside a diamond worth a fortune. That one photograph says everything about Elizabeth Taylor, the grandeur and the grocery list, the legend and the ordinary woman, side by side in the same drawer. The shrines hidden around her home. As the trustees moved deeper into the house, they began noticing something strange. Elizabeth had built small, quiet shrines in nearly every room. In the living room sat a collection of Buddha statuettes. In the reading room, stacks of books about angels and the afterlife. In one corner, a rosary. In another, a framed Star of David. And above a fireplace, a signed photograph of the Dalai Lama. Elizabeth had famously converted to Judaism in 1959 for her marriage to Eddie Fisher. But in her later years, her spiritual searching had reportedly expanded far beyond any single faith. Staff members claimed she consulted a different spiritual advisor almost every month during the last decade of her life. One shelf was said to hold nothing but books on near-death experiences. Another held handwritten prayers from strangers who had sent them to her across the years. Elizabeth once wrote, quote, "I feel as though I'm only the custodian of my jewelry. When I die and they go off to auction, I hope whoever buys them gives them a really good home." She knew she was preparing for an ending. The only remaining question was what, precisely, she was preparing herself to meet. The letters she kept for Michael. Now, among the most sensitive discoveries were the letters, boxes of them, decades of personal correspondence preserved in careful order. Some were love letters from Richard Burton written during the height of their 2 marriages. Some were apologies from ex-husbands hoping to reconnect in her final years. And some, according to whispers from inside the estate, were written to and from her closest friend, Michael Jackson. Elizabeth and Michael had been inseparable since the 1980s. She attended his 1994 wedding to Lisa Marie Presley. She famously called him, quote, "the least weird man I know." And when Michael died in June 2009, Elizabeth was reportedly devastated beyond anything her family had seen from her before. Staff said she kept framed photographs of him throughout her bedroom and sitting room for the rest of her life. The letters between the two of them, according to multiple reports, were never published. Several were said to be so personal, so raw, and so emotionally intimate that the trustees quietly decided to seal them away indefinitely. What those letters contained, only a handful of people alive today know, and none of them are speaking. The safe full of kindness. Yet perhaps the most moving discovery came from a small private safe in her dressing room. Everyone expected more jewelry. Instead, the team reportedly found a thick manila envelope filled with handwritten notes, hospital receipts, and personal checks written in Elizabeth's own hand. The names on them were strangers. The amounts ranged from hundreds to thousands of dollars. The dates stretched back more than 20 years. Elizabeth, it turned out, had been quietly paying the medical bills of AIDS patients across America since the early 1980s. These were people she had never met, people who had been abandoned by their families and their doctors. She had covered their treatments, their hospice care, and in some cases, even their funeral expenses. She never told the press. She never told her own children, and she never took credit for any of it. Publicly, she had already raised more than $270 million for AIDS research through her foundation. That work alone changed the course of modern medicine. But privately, she was funding individual lives too. A family source later reportedly shared her reasoning. Elizabeth had once said that if the patients knew, they would thank her, and she didn't want their thanks. She only wanted them to live. The drawer of 1,000 memories. Then came the drawer that stopped the team entirely. Tucked into a small chest beside her bed, archivists reportedly found a single wooden box. Inside were the objects she had chosen, out of everything she owned, to keep closest to where she slept. A child's baby tooth said to have belonged to one of her own children. A lock of dark hair, preserved carefully in paper, believed to be Richard Burton's. A folded cocktail napkin from the Dorchester Hotel in London, dated 1963, signed by Princess Margaret. These weren't museum pieces. These were the tiny, breakable things a person keeps when their life has already become history. And among them sat one more item, a small taped envelope, marked only with a single word in her unmistakable handwriting. The word was Monty. Monty, of course, was Montgomery Clift, her co-star, her dear friend, and one of the great platonic loves of her life. In May 1956, Monty had been driving home from a dinner at her house when his car struck a telephone pole. Elizabeth ran to the wreckage barefoot. She climbed inside. She reached into his throat with her own fingers and removed 2 broken teeth so he could breathe. She saved his life that night. He died 10 years later, in 1966, at the age of 45. Whatever Elizabeth placed inside that envelope before her death, she sealed it herself. The trustees have reportedly honored her wishes. The envelope has never been opened, and short of a direction from the family, it may never be. A fortune worth $1 billion. While the personal items told one story, the financial side told another. At the time of her death, Bloomberg Businessweek valued her estate at $600 million, though other estimates stretched closer to a full billion. Her real estate holdings alone exceeded $130 million. Her perfume brand, White Diamonds, was still generating $77 million a year in sales. She had been one of the first celebrities in history to turn her name into a global business. Her closets told their own tale. Rows upon rows of monogrammed cowboy boots, hand-dyed in colors the average viewer has never laid eyes on. A fur collection so extensive, it reportedly took archivists 3 full weeks to catalog. Designer gowns with their original tags still attached, sent to her over the years by designers who simply hoped she might one day wear them. And then there were the jewels. In December 2011, Christie's auction house put her collection up for sale. The evening session alone brought in $115.9 million, the most valuable jewelry auction ever held up to that point. The total came close to $157 million. The La Peregrina pearl necklace sold for $11.8 million, the Bulgari Emerald Suite $23 million, the Elizabeth Taylor diamond itself crossed $8 million, the diamond that broke the auction. One sale, however, turned into a scandal all on its own. Richard Burton had presented Elizabeth with the Taj Mahal diamond for her 40th birthday. A 17th-century heart-shaped stone engraved with the name of a Mughal empress. Christie's had estimated it at $300,000 to $500,000. It sold for $8.8 million, 17 times its estimate, a world record for an Indian jewel. Shortly after the sale, the buyer disputed the history of the stone. Christie's rescinded the transaction. Elizabeth's trustees sued the auction house in federal court, claiming that Christie's had violated its own policies. The legal case dragged on for years. The point is this: even after her death, Elizabeth Taylor's jewels were still making headlines. The woman had a magic that didn't die with her. The final door. At 700 Nimes Road, after the inventory was complete, the family distributed what remained. Her 4 children received substantial inheritances. Her 10 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren were provided for through trusts. The Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation continued to receive 25% of all royalties from the use of her image. Her 8th husband, Larry Fortensky, reportedly inherited around $800,000, and the house at 700 Nimes Road was eventually sold in 2016 to a private buyer for around $8 million. Today, the home is quiet, repainted, cleaned, all traces of Elizabeth carefully removed. But not everything left the family. The most private items, the journals, the sealed letters, the unopened envelope marked Monty, remain in the care of the estate. What is inside them, the world may never learn. And honestly, perhaps the world was never meant to. Elizabeth Taylor lived one of the most photographed lives in human history. 7 husbands, 8 marriages, 4 children, countless films, scandals, triumphs, and illnesses. And yet, when the trustees finally walked into her home, they didn't find a monument to fame. They found the quiet things: a child's tooth, a lock of hair, a cocktail napkin, a diamond beside a TV guide. The ordinary treasures of an extraordinary woman. Old Hollywood doesn't die. It simply closes a drawer, locks the door behind it, and walks quietly into the dark.